Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss, where I talk about sci-fi stuff and some other stuff. My name is Eric, and as a huge fan of Star Trek, I love the third season of Star Trek Picard. Every episode had callbacks to different parts of Star Trek history, and I created a video that called out and explained each one. This is a compilation of all those videos and covers each of the 10 episodes in the third season of Star Trek Picard. Let me know what you thought of the season in the comments, and if you would like to see these characters again. Also, don't forget to smash the like and subscribe buttons to support the work that I put into these videos. I really do appreciate it, as the content in this video alone took me at least 50 hours to make. The name of this episode is The Next Generation, which is an obvious reference to the return of most of the original main cast from Star Trek The Next Generation this season. The font and coloring used in the title cards is very similar to the one used in the Next Generation series, as well as many films from that era. This is also the first Star Trek series to take us into the 25th century, with the series Star Trek Enterprise beginning in the 22nd century and most of the others taking place in the 23rd and 24th centuries, Star Trek Discovery being the exception, as that crew is currently in the 32nd century. The song playing as we come upon the SS Ilios is I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire, which as a fan of the video game series Fallout really gave me chills to hear on Star Trek, since that song has been somewhat of an unofficial theme song for the gaming series, having appeared in 3 of the games. But I believe the use of the song here is more so because of its association with the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Remember this because I believe it is connected to what occurs at the end of this episode, and I will discuss it again then. The SS Ilios turns out to belong to Beverly Crusher, who was last seen in the film Star Trek Nemesis. Her quarters on the ship look rather dreary, but do include flowers, which were also present in her quarters on the Enterprise. We also see that she has a pair of Greek tragedy masks, possibly referencing her past as the Dancing Doctor, or when she worked with William Riker on a play in the Next Generation episode Frame of Mind. Along with the music, Dr. Crusher is listening to a log from then Captain Jean-Luc Picard discussing an event that occurred during the Next Generation episode, The Best of Both Worlds. Picard is discussing how the Enterprise D were hiding in a nebula from the Borg, and Dr. Crusher may be using a similar tactic here to hide from whoever eventually finds our ship. In her things, there's also a plaque that was given to Dr. Crusher by the citizens of Cor Carloi 5 after she had eradicated a plague on their planet. This event was never shown on screen, but was mentioned during the Next Generation episode Allegiance. Under this is a case belonging to Jack Crusher, Beverly's late husband, who is also Jean-Luc Picard's best friend and Wesley's father. This case was given to her by Picard after Jack was killed on duty under Picard's command and was seen in the Next Generation episode Family. The ship is boarded by an unknown alien force as Beverly quickly locks someone behind a sealed door. The rifle that Dr. Crusher is using completely vaporizes the aliens, which means that this is not Starfleet issue. Since these types of weapons are banned, this is our first clue that whatever she is working on is not sanctioned by the Federation. After she disposes of the aliens, Dr. Crusher sends a coded message through subspace. We can see that it is tied to the USS Enterprise D from the readout on screen. I also noticed this device on the left, which could be what Dr. Crusher is working on. After a short intro, the episode then cuts to the study of Chateau Picard that we were first introduced to last season. The painting above the fireplace that Laris and Picard are discussing is the same one that hung in the ready room of the Enterprise D, and was salvaged after the ship was destroyed in the film Generations. Also on the mantle of the fireplace is the same Ammonite fossil that was located in the ready room, as well as a bronze figure of a horse and plowman, which was seen in Chateau Picard during the episode Family. Laris mentions how you never forget your first love, which Picard says,
"Well, she wasn't the first, but she was certainly my favorite."
I think this line could have many meanings, like how many Star Trek fans do see The Next Generation as their favorite form of Star Trek, even though the TNG cast was not the first Star Trek crew. While talking about his past, Picard picks up the Resican flute. This may be all that remains of the culture of Catan, which Picard experienced firsthand after his mind was taken there by a probe during the events of the Next Generation episode The Inner Light. Later, Picard is sitting in his study, listening to the same song as early in the episode, I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire. I thought it was pretty cute when we find out later that this song was part of a mixtape that Picard sent her, since mixtapes were very popular in the late 90s when The Next Generation originally aired. Picard receives the coded message from Beverly and is able to discern it using an old code from the Enterprise. The authorization code he uses
Picard 47 Alpha Tango.
is the same one he uses in the film First Contact.
Authorization Picard 47 Alpha Tango.
The use of the number 47 is also very common in Star Trek since the days of The Next Generation and can be traced back to a writer on the show, Joe Menosky. When Picard sits down to hear the message, we see 2 more relics from his past. Over his chair is a tapestry given to him in the episode Who Watches the Watchers, and the figure on his desk is the Kurlan Naskos given to Picard by his mentor of archaeology in the episode The Chase. Picard then shows the message to Laris for her perspective. Laris is a very complicated character with ties to Romulan intelligence who started as Picard's housekeeper in the first season but became close to him after her husband's death. The actress who plays Laris also played a different character in the second season of Picard, but I do not believe that these 2 characters have any real connection. After they decide that Picard must go and help Beverly, we find William Riker sitting at the bar introduced in the last season, 10 Forward Avenue. This establishment is owned by Guinan, who was also a part of the cast of Picard last season and a member of the cast of The Next Generation. The current bartender references an event known as Frontier Day, which has not been mentioned before on Star Trek, but since they state that this is the 250th anniversary of Frontier Day, it makes me think that it is somehow tied to the launch of the NX Enterprise under Jonathan Archer. Picard catches Riker up on what is going on, and Riker recalls how they came up with the Myriad Codex while on a mission to Rigel 7. Rigel 7 is, I believe, the first planet ever revealed on a Star Trek episode, as it was mentioned during the opening of the pilot episode of Star Trek titled The Cage. Picard repeats the word Hellbird and states that he has no memory of it, but Riker quickly recognizes it as a computer virus that the ship encountered while Picard was assimilated by the Borg in the episode The Best of Both Worlds. Picard and Riker set off to find a ship while we are taken to the planet of Metalis Prime. Although this is the first time this location has been seen on screen, it was mentioned during the Enterprise episode Dawn. The name is a reference to Terry Metalis, who is Brandon Braga's assistant on Enterprise and is now the showrunner of the 3rd season of Picard. Rafi is on the planet, who at first appears to have become a junkie again, but it turns out that she is working for Starfleet intelligence. She mentions a quantum tunneling device that was stolen from Starfleet, and this is without a doubt what we see used at the end of this episode. She is also speaking covertly with a handler who is not yet revealed, but I think that their discussion later gives it away. Next, we get a great shot of Earth's space dock, which has been seen in 4 Star Trek films, usually after launching a new ship. Along with the appearance of a new ship is always a long shot so that we can admire it, and the Next Generation theme can also be heard during this extended shot of the Titan. When they arrive on the Titan, they are greeted by the ship's first officer, who we know as Seven, but she introduces herself as Annika Hansen. Annika Hansen was her name before she was abducted by the Borg at a young age and then given the designation 7 of 9. She continued to use the name 7 even after she was freed from the Borg by Captain Janeway and the crew of the Voyager. By requiring 7 to use the name Annika Hansen, a name that she does not feel represents her, the captain of the Titan is doing something very real that is called dead naming, which is something that people in the transgender community and others have to face. The Titan has crew members from many Federation races, such as the Orion, the Vulcans, the Tellarites, the Trill, a Bajoran, a Halean, and I believe even a Saurian. At the helm of the Titan is Sydney LaForge, the daughter of Geordi LaForge. While Geordi is mostly known as a miracle worker chief engineer, he started out on the Enterprise at the helm as well during the show's first season. Coincidentally, in the alternate future shown in the finale of The Next Generation, titled All Good Things, Sydney is also the name of one of LaForge's daughters. 7, or Annika, then brings them to see the captain of the Titan, Liam Shaw. He is played by Todd Stashwick, who is known for many roles, but mainly for his role on the series 12 Monkeys, which Picard showrunner Terry Metalis also created. The song he is listening to is Nocturne in E-flat major, Op. 9, No. 2 by Chopin, and I think that this may be the cleverest Easter egg in the entire episode. While the song does not have a direct tie to Star Trek, it is known for using something that in music is called a Picardy third, which is a major chord at the end of a musical section that is either modal or in a minor key. It would make sense that we would hear a song using a Picardy third during the 3rd season of Picard. The captain turns down their request and reveals that he has been at the helm of the Titan for 5 years before its recent refit. It sounds like he took over directly from Captain Riker and probably feels that now that the ship has been refit, that he does not need to walk in Riker's shadow any longer. Next we see Rafi on the La Serena, looking at her granddaughter until she receives a message from her handler at Starfleet Intelligence. This version of the La Serena, the one with the red paint, is the one from the alternate future that was created last season on Picard, while the original version of the ship was taken by Girardi after she had created a new species of Borg. Rafi is obviously having difficulty with this assignment, and her handler tells her that she needs to be a warrior. I think that this gives away that her handler is probably Worf, the former security chief of the Enterprise D and E, as well as Deep Space Nine. Besides the fact that Rafi and Worf have been seen together in the trailers leading up to this season, Worf is perhaps the greatest warrior that has ever worn a Starfleet uniform, so much so that the title of his first episode on DS9 was The Way of the Warrior. It also looks like the badge shown on the screen when they make contact is the black badge used by Section 31 on the series Discovery, which could mean that this is the branch of Starfleet intelligence that both Raffi and Worf are working for. Their mission is nicknamed Daybreak, which refers to items that have been stolen from the Daystrom Institute. The Daystrom Institute is a Federation institution responsible for most of the Federation's research into different areas of scientific study. In the first season of Picard, it was revealed that B4, as well as the work of his and Data's creator, Nguyen Soon, was being kept there. Back on the Titan, Picard and Riker are confronted by Seven as she demands that they tell her what they are doing on the ship. Seven states that it was Picard as well as Admiral Janeway that convinced her to return to Starfleet after the events of the second season. During that season, Seven revealed that she was not allowed to enter Starfleet after the Voyager returned to Earth due to her former status as a member of the Borg. Seven decides to disobey her captain and takes the ship to the Righton system. She also gives Picard and Riker access to a shuttle before the captain understands what is going on. On the La Sirena, Raffi continues to try to understand who the Red Lady could be until she eventually ties it to the red statue of the former captain of the Enterprise C, Rachel Garrett. Rachel Garrett was not only the captain of the Enterprise that preceded Jean-Luc Picard, but she was also responsible for the eventual peace between the Klingons and the Federation that prevented all-out war between the two, events that were shown in the Next Generation episode, Yesterday's Enterprise. Also in the upper left-hand portion of the screen is a shot of the USS Voyager B, the refit of the Voyager from the series, which is being decommissioned along with the USS Enterprise F, which can be seen on the right-hand portion of the screen. Just as the La Sirena arrives at the target, the building is destroyed. It looks like a black hole is created underneath the building and then created again above it as the building falls down to the ground below. This surprise attack mirrors the one that Japan initiated on the United States at Pearl Harbor in 1941, since at this point the Federation does not believe they're at war with anyone, much like how the United States had not yet entered the Second World War before that attack. In space, Picard and Riker are able to find the Helios and board it looking for Dr. Crusher. Using the sensors, they also see that there's another person on the ship with her and that there has been a phaser fight. The other person reveals themselves to be the son of Beverly Crusher as the episode ends with a huge ship approaching the Titan. Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss? Where today I'll be breaking down the second episode of the final season of Star Trek Picard, titled Disengage. The episode begins with a flashback to an event that occurred 2 weeks before the beginning of the season. The first line of dialogue from Jack Crusher may actually be a huge hint as to what is really going on with his character, as he states that the USS Helios is a Mariposa medical starship.
Crusher on Mariposa medical vessel designation Helios 12 on approach to Sarnia Prime.
Mariposa is a planet that was first mentioned in the Next Generation episode titled Up the Long Ladder. In that episode, the crew of the USS Enterprise D come upon two separate colonies of humans that look exactly alike. It turns out that they are all clones created by the 5 surviving members of a ship named the SS Mariposa. If Dr. and Jack Crusher are working with members of this planet, it could point to their research being based around cloning technology, something that was also a big plot point of the final Next Generation era film, Star Trek Nemesis, where Picard learned that Romulans had stolen his DNA to create a clone of himself. This episode also begins in a similar fashion to the first episode of the season, with the SS Helios in trouble, but this time, it is Jack Crusher, not Beverly Crusher, that handles the issue and is able to save the ship. The ship is approaching a planet named Sarnia Prime. This could be a reference to James Doohan, as he was raised in Sarnia, Ontario, Canada. The Helios is unable to make contact with the planet, and is then quickly come upon by 2 ships from the Fenris Rangers. Seven ended up joining this organization of space vigilantes after she was unable to join Starfleet when the Voyager returned to Earth, something we learn about during the course of the first and second seasons of Picard. We also heard Jack Crusher discuss this event during his meeting with Picard and Riker in the first episode.
They found us on Sarnia. We ran, then Kafla, then Exoport.
After the Fenris Rangers find his stash of Romulan ale, Jack mentions the medical properties of the highly addictive and illegal drink, which may be a callback to how Dr. McCoy described how he used the beverage in the film The Wrath of Khan.
Romulan ale? Why, Bones, you know this is illegal.
I only use it for medicinal purposes.
Back in the present, Jack tells Picard and Riker that they have been running from different people for weeks, including 3 men in Starfleet uniforms that reference the Prime Directive. This may also be a hint as to what the Crushers are up to on the SS Helios. The Prime Directive is the guiding principle of Starfleet and prohibits them from interfering in the development or evolution of another species. The Prime Directive may be the reason that Dr. Crusher left Starfleet, as it is often a point of consternation between medical professionals in the Star Trek universe who are also bound to the Hippocratic Oath that requires them to treat their patients to the best of their ability and is not technically bound by the regulations in Starfleet. The group start to devise a way to use the shuttle that Picard and Riker used to board the Ilios as a means of escape. However, this plan is quickly doused as the shuttle is destroyed, and in a blink and you will miss it moment, we can see a piece of rubble coming towards the camera that shows us that the name of the shuttle was the Savick. Savick was a character first introduced in the film The Wrath of Khan and was played by Kirstie Alley as well as Robin Curtis in future appearances. Before the third season of Picard was released, the showrunner released some background information on the USS Titan and its history, where we learn that Savick was the first captain of the Titan and that after she left her post, she was succeeded by William Riker. We then get a short intro for the episode, and as I mentioned in my breakdown of last week's episode, the title cards use a very similar font and color that the title cards used in The Next Generation and the film starting with Wrath of Khan. Raffi is still understandably upset after the attack shown in last week's episode and attempts to call her handler from Starfleet to meet up. She is aboard the La Serena, which is the version from the main universe given to her from Seven after she was given the ship from Rios. Just like in last week's episode, when Raffi and her handler speak, you can see a modified Starfleet Delta badge on the screen, which looks very similar to the one used by Section 31 during the second season of Discovery. Section 31 is a clandestine organization that works alongside Starfleet to further its interests and was first introduced during the series Deep Space Nine. When Raffi meets up with the Ferengi later in the episode, he is also suspicious of her involvement with Section 31.
You smell like Starfleet. Federation. Section 31.
While speaking with her handler, Raffi brings up the file on Sneed, and if you freeze the frame, you can see that he has 4 associates that should also be very well known to fans of Star Trek. The first is Morn of Luria, who was a background character on Deep Space Nine that never even said a word, but appeared in 93 episodes of the series, as well as 1 episode each of The Next Generation, Voyager, and Lower Decks. Next is Quark of Ferenginar, who is a main character on Deep Space Nine, as well as Brunt of Ferenginar, who is one of the many characters that Jeffrey Combs has played on various different Star Trek series. Then finally there is Thadian Okona, a space pirate first introduced in the Next Generation episode The Outrageous Okona, who also appeared during the first season of Star Trek Prodigy and an episode of Lower Decks. Just as it looks like the Ilios is done for, the Titan comes to the rescue and gets in between the 2 ships. This is very similar to how the USS Enterprise E saved the Defiant, Worf, and Ben Wyatt during the battle with the Borg in the film First Contact. Next we find Raffi back on the planet Metalis Prime. In my video last week, I stated that this planet was first mentioned on the series Enterprise in the episode Dawn. The planet was named after then production assistant Terry Metalis, who is now the showrunner of Star Trek Picard. Raffi is there to meet with Jay, her ex-husband. His character was introduced in the novel Second Self, which takes place between the first and second seasons of Star Trek Picard. He mentions that their son Gabe told him that Raffi ambushed him at the doctor, a scene depicted in the first season Picard episode, Stardust City Rag. Then we get the introduction of Amanda Plummer as this season's supposed big bad, Captain Vadic. Not only is Miss Plummer a very accomplished actress, probably best known for her role in the film Pulp Fiction, but she is also a legacy casting, as her father Christopher Plummer played the Klingon General Chang in the film Star Trek The Undiscovered Country. I believe that she is channeling her father's performance within this character along with her own nuance, and I'm definitely excited to see her this season. She seems to know a lot about everyone on the ship, such as Captain Shaw's psychological profile, and that Picard is now a synthetic being. This leads me to believe that Vadic may also have a connection with Starfleet Intelligence and Section 31. After she tosses the Ilios at the Titan, Ensign Sidney LaForge explains to Captain Shaw how this was possible. Sidney is one of the 2 daughters that Geordi LaForge has, and she's actually following in her father's footsteps as the helmsman of the Titan, since before Geordi became the chief engineer of the Enterprise, he was the helmsman of the ship in the first season. As Picard and Riker try to figure out why Jack is so important to Vadic, Captain Shaw interrupts them and escorts him to the brig. Before Captain Shaw does this, he reads many of Jack Crusher's aliases, including James Cole. James Cole is a character from the sci-fi film and series 12 Monkeys, where in the film he was played by Bruce Willis, and in the series he's played by Aaron Stanford. One of these actors will actually make an appearance in this episode of Picard. The 12 Monkeys series was created by the aforementioned former production assistant on Star Trek Enterprise, Terry Metalis. While in the brig, Picard reads off various charges against Jack and his many aliases. The first mentions the planet Andoria, one of the founding members of the Federation. Picard also mentions the planet Binar 3, and the Binars are a race of coupled, cybernetically enhanced aliens that were introduced in the Next Generation episode 11001001. There's also mention of a murder on Andreas 5. This may be me stretching, but this could be a reference to actor Andreas Katsoulis, who besides playing the character Tomalak on The Next Generation, is better known for his role as Jakar on Babylon 5. On Metalis Prime, Raffi meets with Sneed, who is a Ferengi. This alien race was originally conceived to be the main villains of The Next Generation, but because of the poor reception that they received, they were relegated mostly to comic relief until Armin Sherman's performance as Quark on DS9 resurrected them. Sneed is wearing a fur coat, which looks a lot like the pelts that the Ferengi wore in their first appearance during the Next Generation episode The Last Outpost. Along with the fur coat, Sneed also has tattoos on his head, which were found on the Ferengi shown during The Next Generation, but this was mostly dropped for their future appearances on Deep Space Nine and other series. Sneed is played by actor Aaron Stanford, who, as I mentioned, was one of the stars of the series 12 Monkeys, which Picard showrunner Terry Matalas created. Sneed has Raffi use a drug named Splinter to prove her story. Splinter is another callback to 12 Monkeys, as besides being the name of the first episode of the series, it is also the name of the technology used to travel through time. Raffi is saved by none other than Worf, who it turns out was her handler with Starfleet intelligence. When he reveals himself, you can hear the Klingon theme written by Jerry Goldsmith that was first heard in the original Star Trek motion picture. Back on the Titan, Jack is able to escape from the worst brig ever and attempts to give himself up trying to save the crew. One of the most infamous lines from the film The Wrath of Khan is that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh
The needs of the few.
or the one.
And even though Jack is not a part of Starfleet, he seems to understand this. This could also be the reason why Captain Shaw does not want to sacrifice a crew of 500 for one person. After Gates McFadden and Patrick Stewart bring the house down by just sharing a look, Picard finally pulls rank as Admiral and gets the ship ready for a fight. He concedes that Jack Crusher is his son and takes the ship into the nebula. Now, this has a lot of connections to The Wrath of Khan. Not only because James Kirk also found out that he had a son in that movie named David Marcus, but Kirk also tried to evade Khan by entering a nebula, much like how Picard takes the Titan into a nebula to try to evade the Shrike. Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss?, where today I'll be breaking down the third episode of the final season of Star Trek Picard, titled 17 Seconds. This episode is directed by Jonathan Frakes, who you could argue also gives one of the best performances in this episode as Captain Will Riker. The episode begins right where the last one ended, with the massive Shrike and her crew under the command of Captain Vadic on the hunt for the USS Titan. I put out a video last week concerning Captain Vadic's crew and what alien race they could be that I will leave here and in the description for you to check out after this video. As has been the case for much of this season, the music used in this scene is very similar to the music created by Jerry Goldsmith for the film The Wrath of Khan, specifically in this case to the battle scenes between the two ships in that film. This entire chase into the nebula is also very much like the tactics used by the Enterprise in the film Wrath of Khan, and just like in that film, both ships lose their sensors when they enter the nebula.
Why are we slowing? Can't follow them into the nebula, sir. Our shields would be useless.
However, unlike Khan, Captain Vadic seems to be a much more calculated villain, and still within the nebula she seems to have the upper hand. After the intro, we get our second flashback in 2 episodes, as we see Captain Riker and Admiral Picard enjoying a drink in 10 Forward on Earth. This is the same bar owned by Guinan, and named after the bar she ran on the USS Enterprise D during the run of The Next Generation. This bar was also featured last season on Picard, and earlier this season in the first episode. Riker retells the story of his son's birth to Picard, which began with an ominous message from sickbay. This reminded me of another ominous message that Captain Kirk received after Spock had sacrificed his life for the crew in the movie Wrath of Khan.
Jim, I think you better get down here.
Bones?
Better hurry.
Then we get our first scene this season with Marina Sirtis as Deanna Troi, calling her husband after caring for their son. In the first season of Picard, we learn that after Will Riker and Deanna Troi were married and left the Enterprise after the conclusion of the film Nemesis, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. Tragically, their son Thaddeus contracted a deadly disease and passed away just a few years before we meet Riker and Troi again on Picard. It was revealed in a novel that Thaddeus was named after Will Riker's ancestor and that his middle name was Worf. Back on the Titan, Seven is fidgeting with something in her quarters, having been confined there by the captain last episode. The first thing we see in her room is a model of the USS Voyager that she served on. The classical music that she is listening to may also be a way for her to remember her time on the Voyager, as she and the Doctor became singing partners in the latter years of the series. Seven is visited by Sidney LaForge, one of Geordi LaForge's 2 daughters. Sidney mentions that she went against the grain by becoming a helmsman and not an engineer, but Geordi was the helmsman on the Enterprise for the first season of The Next Generation, so in a way she is still honoring her father. Then Picard finally confronts Beverly about Jack. There's a lot going on in this scene, but I think that I'm going to save my thoughts about it for my review of the episode, which will come out on Monday during my weekly podcast WDIM News, so be sure that you are subscribed so that you do not miss it. Jack and Riker also have a talk where Jack mentions that Picard is now positronic. This is referencing Picard's death and rebirth as an android with a positronic central nervous system in the first season of the series. An interesting side note to all of this is that Thaddeus Riker could have been treated with positronic technology that would have saved his life, but this did not happen because at the time, all android technology like this was banned. I wonder if Riker is at all bitter that Picard's life was saved by the same technology that could have saved his own son's life. Coincidentally, if Thaddeus were still alive, he would be about the same age that Jack is this season. All of this is broken up by the reappearance of the Shrike, who circles and attacks the Titan. During the attack, Captain Shaw is injured and transfers command of the ship to Will Riker. Remember, this is only necessary because Shaw relieved his own number 1, Seven, in the last episode. After Riker, along with his new number 1, Picard, are able to blast themselves away from the Shrike, we find Worf on the La Serena. It sounds like he is listening to Klingon opera, something he had a large collection of on Deep Space Nine. Worf goes through his whole formal Klingon introduction, which first references that he is the son of Mogh. His father, Mogh, was an influential figure in the Klingon Empire, but was killed during a Romulan attack. Worf was taken in by human parents, and he mentions his father Sergei and his house Rashenko. Worf sent his own son Alexander to live with his human parents after his mother Kalar was killed. Worf also mentions that he is part of the House of Martok, one of the most powerful families in the Klingon Empire. Martok invited Worf to join his house after the two survived a Dominion POW camp together in the 5th season of Deep Space Nine. Worf also mentions that he is the bane of the Duras family. This began when a member of the Duras family framed Worf's father for the Romulan attack that had killed him, which Worf later proved in the Next Generation episode Sins of the Father, even though it was not revealed by the Empire at the time. Later, Worf, along with Jean-Luc Picard and the rest of the Next Generation crew, would be threatened repeatedly by the Duras sisters, Lursa and B'Etor, in a few more episodes, along with them being a secondary antagonist in the film Star Trek Generations, where they were destroyed. The first canonical appearance of a member of the House of Duras is actually the forefather of the family, whose name was Duras, and he was killed in battle by the first captain of the NX Enterprise, Jonathan Archer, in the Star Trek Enterprise episode titled The Expanse. Finally, Worf calls himself the Slayer of Gowron. Gowron was a former Chancellor of the Klingon Empire who rose to power thanks largely to Picard and Worf during the Next Generation episode Reunion. However, Gowron eventually became corrupted by that power, and after losing his honor in the eyes of Worf and many Klingons, he was killed in ritualistic combat by Worf, who then gave the power of Chancellor to Martok in the Deep Space Nine episode Tacking into the Wind. One of the lesser-known facts about Michael Dorn's portrayal of Worf is that he has appeared as the character in more episodes and films than any other in the history of Star Trek, which at the time of the release of this episode of Picard marks 271 appearances. Michael Dorn also appeared in the film The Undiscovered Country as a lawyer defending Kirk and McCoy in the Klingon courtroom scene, who turns out is an ancestor of Worf. Worf refers to himself as a subcontractor of Starfleet when Raffi asks him about his role as her handler. I think that along with the other hints that I've mentioned in my prior videos about the first 2 episodes of the season, all but confirm that Worf has joined Section 31, a covert paramilitary organization that operates in the best interests of the Federation, but is not officially connected to Starfleet. Section 31 was first introduced on the series Deep Space Nine, but they were shown to be operating even before the Federation was created during the events shown on the series Enterprise. Back on the Titan, they continue to play a cat-and-mouse game with the Shrike until they are finally come upon after reaching the edge of a nebula. The Shrike fires a weapon that seems to create an entrance point as well as an exit point to a black hole, which may be the same weapon that was used on the Starfleet Recruitment Center in the first episode of the season. Raffi and Worf return to Metalis Prime to look for the person who made contact with the Ferengi Sneed, a character named Titus Ricta. This character is played by actor Thomas Dekker, and this is not the first time he has appeared in Star Trek. As a very young boy, he played Thomas Picard, one of Jean-Luc's sons that were shown to him in an alternate timeline within the Nexus reality in the film Star Trek Generations. Also, as I have mentioned before, the planet Metalis Prime is named after Terry Metalis, the showrunner of Star Trek Picard. I know that some people don't like it when I repeat myself, but I can't be sure who has watched all my videos. It turns out that Titus is a changeling, a shape-shifting being that was first introduced in the pilot episode of Deep Space Nine, as the station's security chief and one of its main characters, Odo, was a member of the alien race. Eventually, the changelings, and more specifically a character known as the female changeling, became major antagonists as the architects behind the Dominion, a conglomerate of different alien races based in the Gamma Quadrant. Now, if you do not watch Deep Space Nine, there is no way I can cover everything here that you need to know, but I will be coming out with a video later in the week that better explains the changelings and their role in the Dominion War. The reason that Titus is acting as if he is experiencing withdrawal symptoms is because a changeling in its native form is basically a pile of goo, and a changeling must revert to this pile of goo every 16 to 18 hours or they will not be able to hold whatever form they are mimicking. This means that Worf and Raffi caught Titus on his way to regenerate, or they had been holding him for quite a few hours before he is forced to revert to his native form. Jack is injured by another changeling that is operating as an officer on the Titan and is brought to sickbay. Picard is called down to sickbay and experiences the same 17 seconds of worry that Riker described to him in the flashback scene earlier in this episode. After Titus reveals himself to be a changeling, Worf asks him how long it has been since he has entered the Great Link. The Great Link is the combined mass of most changelings, which is their preferred form of existence. It resembles a large ocean made of mercury on an otherwise derelict planet. We learn through Odo that the Great Link has a telepathic effect on changelings that draws them to it, which is why Odo decides to return there after the conclusion of the Dominion War. Worf and Odo became reluctant friends after Worf was stationed on DS9, mainly due to Worf not understanding why Odo would allow Quark to act as a criminal on the station, and Odo not appreciating Starfleet protocols. When Worf speaks of an old friend within the link to Raffi, he must be referencing Odo, and if anyone would have figured out a secret plot, it would have been him. Sadly, the actor who played Odo, René Auberjonois, passed away in 2019, but his likeness along with archive footage were used in a recent episode of the animated series Star Trek Prodigy. This episode ends with the Shrike using their primary weapon again on the Titan, which causes the Titan to basically fire on itself, causing catastrophic damage as the ship falls deeper into the nebula. Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss?, where today I'll be breaking down the 4th episode of the final season of Star Trek Picard, titled No-Win Scenario, and looking for every Easter egg that I can find. The title of the episode is based on the infamous training scenario at Starfleet Academy named the Kobayashi Maru, that is designed to put cadets in a certain death situation to see how they react under extreme stress. James T. Kirk was at least at one point the only cadet ever to beat the Kobayashi Maru test, which he did by cheating it, because in his words,
I don't like to lose.
At the time, he did not believe in the no-win scenario, but it still was a lesson he was forced to learn in the film The Wrath of Khan. The 2009 Star Trek film, directed by J.J. Abrams, showed a young James Kirk beating the Kobayashi Maru at Starfleet Academy and also revealed that Spock is the individual responsible for creating the test.
How the hell did that kid beat your test?
I do not know.
This is the second episode of Picard in a row that is directed by Jonathan Frakes, who pulls double duty by also starring as Captain Will Riker this season. This is the last of 6 episodes that he will have directed for the series over its 3 seasons, and I sincerely hope that Mr. Frakes is allowed to continue to work on other Star Trek projects in the future. And given his history with the franchise over the past 30 years, there's a good chance that he will show up in anything Star Trek does, since no one has appeared in more films and series than Jonathan Frakes. While it is true that Michael Dorn does have the record for most individual appearances by an actor on Star Trek, with 272 total at this point, Jonathan Frakes has appeared on more total Star Trek series and films than any other, including Mr. Dorn. Having appeared in 4 films, as well as The Next Generation of course, along with appearing on Deep Space Nine as his clone Thomas Riker, on Voyager thanks to a cutaway scene created by Q, on Enterprise as a major character during the show's finale, 3 episodes of the animated series Lower Decks, and now Star Trek Picard. By comparison, Mr. Dorn did not appear on Voyager or Enterprise, and at this point has not yet appeared on Lower Decks. This episode starts with a scene that occurred 5 years before the events of this episode. This is the 3rd episode in a row to have a flashback scene, and the 2nd to occur at 10 Forward Avenue. a bar that is owned by Guinan, a reoccurring character on The Next Generation and one who appeared last season on Picard. The bar scene in the third episode this season took place in 2381, after the birth of Riker and Troy's son Thaddeus, and this scene takes place in 2396, which would mean that this flashback occurs during the same year that Thaddeus Riker died. It is tragically ironic that given that we see later that Jack was here in this bar at this time, that it seems that Riker lost his son the same year that Picard also had a chance to have a relationship with his son, but lost it as well. While Picard is sitting down trying to enjoy his fish and chips, he is come upon by a group of Starfleet cadets who want to know about his experience with an alien race known as the Herogen. This would be a story that I'd like to hear as well, because first of all, we never saw an incident with Picard and the Herogen since the Predator-like species only appeared on the series Star Trek Voyager, which occurred thousands of light years away in the Delta Quadrant. The cadets actually reference both of these facts.
Did you ever find out how they got to the quadrant?
Did Admiral Janeway offer any advice?
Picard tells the cadets that Lieutenant Commander Worf had created a deadfall trap to save Picard and crew. This is the same type of trap used by the cast of Family Guy to catch one of their most ruthless villains, James Woods.
Ooh, a piece of candy. Ooh, a piece of candy. Ooh, a piece of candy. Ooh, a piece of candy.
After the intro, Seven goes on the hunt for the Changeling and starts in Ensign Foster's quarters. On his desk is the Vulcan strategy game Calto that Tuvok played on the series Star Trek Voyager. In that game, the final shape is formed by correctly placing many smaller shapes together that create this one new shape, which could be seen as a metaphor for the Great Link and how changelings lose themselves in the link. If you are curious at all about the changelings or want a refresher on their history, I put out a video this past week about them that I'm really proud of that you should definitely check out. I've left a link to it on this video and in the description for you to check out after this video. During this time of peril, Picard and Sun find time to fire up the holodeck and have a drink. Not the best vehicle for this scene, I agree, and I should also point out that Jack, by admitting to being 23 or 24, puts his birth before the events of Star Trek Nemesis. So maybe there is still something to Jack that we do not know, but if he is at least 23, then that means that he was alive during the events of the film Nemesis. Jack tells Picard about a story on the planet Metalis 4, and Metalis Prime is the planet that Raffi and Worf are currently, characters that are both notably absent from this episode. Both of these planets are named after Picard's showrunner, Terry Matalas. Seven tells Captain Shaw that there's a changeling on board and that she needs his help to find them. She also mentions that she has never encountered a changeling before, which kind of makes sense, since the USS Voyager was in the Delta Quadrant during the entirety of the Dominion War. If Seven is still not aware of the characteristics of a changeling, this probably means that they are one of the few alien species in the universe that the Borg cannot assimilate. Captain Shaw explains to Seven that changelings need to revert to their natural state every so often and to search for their pot.
What are you people? On dope?
When he gives Seven the pad that explains this, a picture of the bucket that the changeling Odo used on Deep Space Nine is shown, along with a picture of Renee Auberjonois as the character. Next we see Vadic on the Shrike communicate with someone or something by cutting off her wrist. This would seem to confirm that she is also a changeling, and that by removing a part of herself, she is able to communicate with other changelings that are in the Great Link. However, the changeling that Worf and Raffi were able to capture stated that he was part of a splinter group, so this could mean that both of these changelings, along with others, are part of another link. There was a changeling named Laz, who like Odo was sent off into the universe by the Founders and eventually found his way to DS9. He had an animosity towards humanoid beings that was very much like the Founders, but did not wish to return to the Great Link and instead wanted to find other changelings so that he could create his own Great Link. Laz appeared in the DS9 episode Chimera and was played by frequent Star Trek contributor J.G. Hertzler. One aspect of the changelings is that they do not harm each other, and Vadic does seem very afraid of this being who openly threatens her. So it's possible this being is not a changeling as well. But let me know in the comments if you have any theories on who the real big bad is this season. Vadic is forced to disengage and jettison the portal technology in order to pursue the Titan. When she does this, you can briefly see the Daystrom Institute branding on the technology, confirming that this is what Worf and Raffi are searching for. We return to 10 Forward Avenue, and Picard is still telling stories to cadets. However, in the story he is telling, he seems to mispronounce the name of the alien species involved.
Then I realized that the Temerians' language was based on metaphor.
The event that he is talking about took place in the Next Generation episode Darmok and involved aliens from the species known as Temerian, or the Children of Tama. The Telarians appeared in the TNG episode titled Suddenly Human and do not speak in metaphor. Jack and Picard are still talking in 10 Forward when Captain Shaw walks in. he reveals why he has such a disdain for Picard and Seven by proxy, which is that he suffered at the hands of the Borg at the Battle of Wolf 359. This has proven to be one of the most pivotal events in the history of the Federation, as not only was it their first real engagement with the cybernetic species that resulted in a tremendous loss of life, but it also resulted in then Captain Picard being abducted by the Borg and used to help decimate the Federation forces there. These events were told in the infamous two-part cliffhanger Next Generation episode, The Best of Both Worlds, but Picard has shown on multiple occasions that he is still affected by this event.
They took everything I was. They used me to kill. I should have been able to stop them. I tried. But I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't good enough.
Captain Shaw is also not the first Starfleet officer to have faced Picard in battle at Wolf 359, as Benjamin Sisko was on another vessel that was destroyed during the fight, where he lost his wife and the mother to his child. During his story, Captain Shaw refers to himself as a grease monkey. This is a term that has been used by characters on Star Trek before, like Tom Paris on Voyager and Jet Reno on Discovery, but this could actually be a small nod to the actor who plays Captain Shaw, Todd Stashwick, who also appeared on the show 12 Monkeys, a series created by Picard's showrunner, Terry Matalas. Captain Shaw is suffering not only from post-traumatic stress disorder and survivor's guilt, but also from being a dipshit from Chicago. As a fellow dipshit from Chicago, I can say that this character is quickly becoming one of my favorites in this new era of Star Trek. Not to mention that the actor who plays Captain Shaw, Todd Stashwick, is also from Chicago.
We're on a mission from God.
Dr. Crusher, Picard, and Jack deduce that the power surges in the nebula can be tracked, and they want to try to use the wave to power the ship and exit the nebula. Since they know when the waves are going to hit, they create a plan to channel the energy directly through the nacelles into the warp core. This whole situation really reminded me of Doc Brown and Marty McFly's plan in the original Back to the Future film, when they used the energy from a lightning strike to power their time machine back to the future. Let's not forget that the actor that played Doc Brown, Christopher Lloyd, also played the evil Klingon Krug in the third Star Trek film, The Search for Spock. While Dr. Crusher is explaining the theory to Captain Riker, Picard brings up
Farpoint.
Exactly.
This is a reference to the very first adventure that Picard, Dr. Crusher, Riker, and the rest of the crew of the Enterprise D went through together in the pilot episode of The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint, when they made first contact with a new form of life that resembled a large jellyfish in space. I also love how Picard just shouts out the reference while Dr. Crusher is talking, which is something I do in my real life whenever I hear someone make a reference to Star Trek.
What is that?
Star Trek 2, Wrath of Khan!
They all discuss the plan and how it will be hard to manually navigate the ship through the wave. I know that this did not end up happening in this episode, but I can't be the only one that thought we were going to see the return of Riker and the joystick before this episode was over. An infamous scene that occurred in the film Star Trek Insurrection, which, like this episode, was also directed by Jonathan Frakes. The crew prepare for the final wave and even get a feel-good moment from Picard saying his infamous catchphrase.
Engage.
The unlikely duo of Captain Shaw and Seven are sent to remove the cover from the warp nacelles so that they can accept the power surge. While they are doing this, the Changeling comes in disguised as Sidney LaForge, and Seven is able to determine that she is not who she appears to be and shoots her dead, after LaForge calls Seven by her former name. This scene reminded me of one of the funniest scenes in another franchise starring Patrick Stewart, The X-Men.
It's me. Prove it. You're a dick. Okay.
The Titan is able to make it out of the nebula, but the Shrike is waiting for them when they do. They are able to evade the Shrike though, thanks to some pretty quick thinking by Captain Riker, who uses the ship's tractor beam to throw an asteroid at the other ship, disabling it. This is rather poetic justice, since earlier in the season in the episode Disengage, the Shrike used its tractor beam to throw the Helios at the Titan. The episode ends with the crew witnessing the birth of hundreds of beings that may be younger versions of the entity from the pilot episode of The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint. Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss?, where today I'll be breaking down the 5th episode of the final season of Star Trek Picard, titled Imposter, and looking for all the references and Easter eggs that you may have missed. The title of the episode is a reference to the main villains this season, the Changelings, who now it seems can perfectly mimic other humanoid beings. If you want to know more about the history of the Changelings, I highly recommend that you check out a video I just put out about them, that I will leave a link to in the description of this video. The title Imposter is also a reference to the building tension created by these villains, whereas the crew are unable to trust anyone in Starfleet or even each other. This situation is very similar to the one created in the classic science fiction film The Thing, directed by John Carpenter and released in 1982. which is a retelling of the novel Who Goes There by John Campbell, which was released in 1938. In that film, an alien is able to mimic human beings and animals on a remote post in Antarctica, and the survivors there are slowly picked off until only two remain. And by the end, even the audience is not sure who is human and who is alien. The biggest development in this episode is that Dr. Crusher discovers that now changelings can pass biological tests, such as a blood screening, which is what Starfleet had used to detect changelings in the past. This was shown to be used by Starfleet in many Deep Space Nine episodes during the Dominion War, but I highly recommend watching an episode named Paradise Lost, as that is the best example of how these tests affected the morale of Starfleet and its citizens. Not to mention that even before this season of Picard, there were changelings that found ways around these tests and even used them to frame Starfleet officers. Even still, Seven states early in the episode that this type of testing and screening is still done on all Starfleet ships since the Dominion War. After the intro, Riker is required to give Captain Shaw back command of the Titan and does so by saying,
"I relieve you, sir."
I stand relieved.
We have seen this ceremony on Starfleet vessels a few times before, such as in the aptly titled Next Generation episode, Chain of Command.
I relieve you, sir. I stand relieved.
Then we get the return of Worf and Raffi, who did not appear in the last episode, but play a much bigger role in this one. When we first see them, they are sparring, and you may have noticed that Worf is using a new type of Klingon blade weapon this season. This is called a Kurleth, which was designed especially for this season by Dan Curry, who has worked with Star Trek since the first season of The Next Generation. Dan Curry also worked with the actor who plays Worf, Michael Dorn, on the design of the Batleth, which was first introduced as a Klingon weapon on The Next Generation, as well as the Mechleth, which debuted in the series Deep Space Nine, meaning that for each new show that Worf appears on, he gets a new weapon.
Where does he get those wonderful toys?
At one point, Worf seems to enter the Matrix and shows that he had just been toying with Raffi the whole time they were sparring. If you really want to see Beast Mode Worf, I suggest watching the Deep Space Nine episode By Infernal's Light, in which Worf tears through a bunch of Jem'Hadar one after another. Seriously, after watching that episode, you will never again wonder who's the biggest badass in the history of Star Trek. Worf goes searching for the next criminal in line to Sneed, the Ferengi gangster he killed earlier this season. While he is searching, we see a few other characters from Trek's history on his screen. The first is L'Rell of Renia, and this character was shown to be an associate of Quark's in the Deep Space Nine episode Who Mourns for Morn. The next two listed are Sneed and Toluco, who were both beheaded in the Picard episode Disengage. On the next screen, there is Morn of Luria, who is a regular customer at Quark's on DS9, appearing in 93 episodes without ever having one line of dialogue. The character's name Morn is an anagram of the character Norm, a regular at the bar on the series Cheers. There's also Brunt of Ferenginar, one of the many characters on Star Trek that Jeffrey Combs has played. He has yet to appear on Star Trek Picard though, so here's hoping we actually get to see Brunt, or perhaps the next clone of Weyoun, before the season is over. Then finally there is Stadion Okona of Omega, who is a character that was introduced in the TNG episode The Outrageous Okona and was played by Billy Campbell. The actor also reprised the voice of this character in the first season of the animated series Prodigy and appeared at a Starfleet dance party on the series Lower Decks. After Captain Shaw alerts Starfleet to what has transpired, they send the USS Intrepid to meet them. On the way, Shaw seems rather pleased with what he thinks is about to happen to Picard and Riker, and reminds them of various times they have seemingly failed at their mission or otherwise caused havoc on the galaxy. First he says,
"They might remember that time that someone hot-dropped the saucer section of the Enterprise D on a planet,"
which is a summation of the aftermath of the events in the film Star Trek Generations. Shaw then says,
"Or that time that someone threw the Prime Directive out the window so they could snog a villager on Baku."
This is referencing the events of the film Star Trek Insurrection. And then Shaw ends with,
"Or the time that you boys nearly wiped out all of humanity by creating a time paradox in the Devron system,"
which occurred in the final episode of The Next Generation titled All Good Things. It is interesting that Shaw seems to only reference events that happened towards the end of the Enterprise D and E crew's time together, and this could be because these events happened while Shaw was serving in Starfleet. Picard and Riker, along with the audience, are shocked to see the return of now Commander Ro Laren on the Titan. This is the first appearance by actress Michelle Forbes as the character in almost 30 years, after appearing in 8 episodes of The Next Generation starting in the 5th season, the last of which is the second to last episode of TNG titled Preemptive Strike. If you follow my channel, then you may recall I actually put out a video about her possible return over 6 months ago.
See, I did say that. Very clever.
It was revealed in the book The Making of Star Trek Deep Space Nine that Miss Forbes was made an offer to continue on as the character on DS9 as its first officer, but that she declined. This part was then changed and became the role of Kira Nerys, and the connection between the two is something that I believe is alluded to later in this episode of Picard. Many of the events of Ro Laren's last appearance are referenced in this episode of Picard, such as her pulling a phaser on Riker and joining a resistance group known as the Maquis. The Maquis were started by a group of settlers on worlds that were annexed to Cardassia by the Federation, who were then forced to fight for their own homes. They received support from many officers in Starfleet, and some like Ro Laren and half the crew of the USS Voyager at one point left to join their movement. Sadly, most of the Maquis were wiped out by the Dominion after Cardassia agreed to join their side in the war, and by turning herself in, Ro Laren probably saved herself the same fate. On Metalis Prime, we are introduced to the Vulcan criminal leader, Kryn, played by actor Kurt Acevedo. He has been a working actor for almost 30 years, and is probably most well known for one of his first roles on the series Oz, but more recently, he starred in the series 12 Monkeys, which was created by Picard showrunner Terry Matalas. Kryn mentions to Worf and Raffi that he and Sneed were very close, and if you recall, Sneed was also played by an actor who starred on 12 Monkeys, Aaron Stanford. In that series, the characters that Mr. Stanford and Acevedo played are very close, similar to Sneed and Kryn. It turns out that the Raffi we have been watching on the planet is a hologram and is wearing a mobile emitter that allows her to exist outside of a holodeck. This technology actually originates from the 29th century and was given to the holographic doctor on the USS Voyager episode Future's End. Speaking of the holodeck, Ro has Picard enter the holodeck version of 10 Forward Avenue at gunpoint, after which Picard turns off the safety protocols. You may have noticed that throughout this season, there are moments that have been teased in the show's end credits, such as Captain Shaw's service on the USS Constance and the date referencing the Battle of Wolf 359. There is also a quick LCAR screen showing that the safety controls have been taken off of the holodeck, referencing this scene in this episode. Picard asks Ro,
"You do remember Guinan, don't you?"
And both of them, along with Picard, were turned into 12-year-olds along with Keiko O'Brien in the Next Generation episode Rascals. That episode also featured Riker and a young Picard at one point pretending to be father and son. Back on the planet, Kryn has Worf and Raffi take part in a one-on-one battle to the death. This is apparently a very common occurrence in Vulcan tradition, and we witness it first in the infamous original series episode, Amok Time, something Raffi actually calls out.
Fight to the death? How original.
Kryn reveals that he was able to get past the advanced AI at Daystrom Station with a device that can exploit its weaknesses. This is a theory, but I think that Lore could be the AI guarding Daystrom Station, and the device used to defeat him is the hologram of Professor Moriarty. I say this because we know both characters will appear at some point this season, and there are clues already that Lore was or is at Daystrom Station. The hologram of Professor Moriarty was created in the Next Generation episode Elementary My Dear Data, with the explicit purpose of being able to defeat Data, Lore's brother, so it stands to reason that the good professor would be able to defeat Lore as well. On the Titan, Ro gives Picard a Bajoran earring and leaves for the Intrepid. We see later that this earring actually holds the data behind her entire investigation. But eagle-eyed Star Trek fans may have noticed that this earring is not actually the one the character wore during her time on the Next Generation. It more closely resembles the one worn by Kira Nerys on Deep Space Nine, which is a possible nod to the connection between the two characters that I mentioned earlier. Ro is forced to make the ultimate sacrifice and pilots her shuttle toward one of the nacelles on the Intrepid after saying goodbye to Picard. It is ironic that Ro's last scene takes place on a shuttle, since that is where she was last seen in the TNG episode Preemptive Strike. Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss?, where today I'll be breaking down the Easter egg heavy 6th episode of the final season of Star Trek Picard, titled Bounty. Seriously, there is a lot to get through, and I'm going to really try and pick out everything in not only the Daystrom Station and the Fleet Museum, but also all the returning characters. The title of the episode is not only a reference to the task that Vadic has been put to, which is to find Jack Crusher at all costs, but is also a reference to a Klingon bird of prey that was hijacked by the crew of the USS Enterprise and renamed the HMS Bounty by Dr. McCoy in the film The Voyage Home, a ship that we actually get to see later in this episode at the Fleet Museum and becomes essential to the Titan's escape. Captain Kirk and crew took the ship from the Klingons after they set the original USS Enterprise to self-destruct while the Klingons were still on it in the prior film The Search for Spock. This is why we do not see the original USS Enterprise at the Fleet Museum later in the episode, but thankfully, we do get to see its successor. Dr. McCoy took the name HMS Bounty from an infamous incident that occurred in 1789 that is most widely known as the Mutiny on the Bounty. Coincidentally, This episode of Picard features the crew of the Enterprise D along with members of the Titan committing acts of mutiny against Starfleet. The episode begins with Starfleet as well as Vadic on the hunt for the USS Titan A, but only finding the decoy beacons they leave behind. Vadic is visibly frustrated by being unable to find the Titan and has one of her crew executed on the bridge. We learned earlier this season that Vadic as well as her crew are changelings, which are beings that can mimic the appearance of any other object or being, and were introduced on the series Deep Space Nine. Since there's a lot to go through in this episode of Picard, I'm not going to go over things I've covered before this season, but if you do want to know more about Vadic and the changelings, I did put out a video on the species and their histories that you should definitely check out. After the intro, Beverly and Jean-Luc are discussing Jack's condition, and the doctor reveals that Jack has Irumodic syndrome, which is a Star Trek disease that affects the brain. In the first season of Picard, he learned from his doctor that his Irumodic syndrome had worsened, and that led eventually to Picard's death at the end of that season. Picard also had another Star Trek disease named Shalif syndrome as a child, which his clone Shinzon was afflicted with as well in the film Star Trek Nemesis, but Beverly does not mention if Jack had that too. After a reunion with Worf and Raffi, the crew discussed the threat of the changelings and their past with the Federation. At one point, they discussed the morphogenic virus created by Section 31 that infected the changelings as well as the Great Link during the Dominion War. The virus made it more difficult for changelings to shape themselves into humanoids, and each time they attempted to do so, it progressed the disease further. Since the cure was only given to the changelings that were in the Great Link, in the final episode of DS9 titled What You Leave Behind, any changeling that did not have contact with the Great Link would still be infected, such as a changeling named Laz that was unknowingly infected by Odo in the Deep Space Nine episode named Chimera. If Laz was able to join with any other changelings after visiting Deep Space Nine, this could have started this rival faction that is set against the Federation now. The crew decided to break into Daystrom Station, which is an off-site facility of the Daystrom Institute, a Starfleet institution known for research and development that has been mentioned many times before. Both are named after Richard Daystrom, a scientist from 23rd century Earth whose genius was thought to be on par with Albert Einstein in the field of artificial intelligence. He created an advanced computer system sophisticated enough to operate a starship without the need of a human crew, but went crazy before he could perfect it, event shown in the original series episode titled The Ultimate Computer. Incidentally, the computer Dr. Daystrom built was named the M5 and was based on a human neural network which included aspects of his own personality. We learn in this episode that Daystrom Station is also protected by an advanced AI whose inventor included aspects of his own and other AI personalities. This being calls itself Daystrom Android M510, which could mean this is the 10th variation of that same program that Dr. Daystrom created, tying Dr. Soon's creations together with Starfleet's first AI scientist, Richard Daystrom. Although he is not revealed until the third act, you can hear Brent Spiner's voice say thank you when Worf enters the device into the Daystrom security system.
Thank you.
As they begin to walk around, Worf states that this site houses many items held by Section 31. I've gone over what Section 31 is in pretty much every video I created this season, so I won't now, but I think that since Worf knows that Section 31 keeps stuff at this facility, it may be confirmation that he and Ro were operatives of Section 31 and not working with Starfleet directly. This means that Section 31 are actually the good guys this season, which would be a first. I feel like Riker is every Star Trek fan here, because while he's walking around the station, he tries to get a good look at everything he passes. The first thing he passes is a Thalaron generator, which was a deadly device used by Shinzon and his allies in the film Star Trek Nemesis. Riker also passes a Genesis device, which was a scientific discovery that could create and destroy life on a planet in almost an instant. The device was first seen in the film Wrath of Khan, and the result of its detonation in that film was a big part of its sequel, The Search for Spock. It is interesting to note that the panel here states that this is a Genesis 2 device, which possibly means that Starfleet or someone else has created a newer version of this technology. Raffi also passes the final resting place of Captain James T. Kirk. The existence of this tomb would mean that James Kirk's burial site is not on Veridian 3, where Picard created a gravesite for him in the film Star Trek Generations. When Worf rounds the corner, behind him I believe you can see a picture of a device known as a vinculum, which is a processing device at the heart of every Borg vessel that interconnects the minds of all its drones and was featured in the Voyager episode Infinite Regress. In that episode, Seven begins to exhibit the personalities of other people, in her case people she helped assimilate. Throughout the episode, she is cycling through different personalities, which is very similar to what occurs with the Daystrom android cycling through its different personalities in this episode of Picard. Worf then comes upon the greatest enemy of the Klingon Empire, the Tribble. This furry creature was first introduced in the classic original series episode, The Trouble with Tribbles, where we learn that Tribbles have a certain aversion to Klingons and vice versa. This is better explained in another classic Star Trek episode, Deep Space Nine's Troubles and Tribulations, in which Worf is forced to explain the history between the two warring species to a skeptical Odo.
A mortal enemy of the Empire.
They were an ecological menace. Hundreds of warriors were sent to track them down throughout the galaxy. An armada obliterated the Tribble homeworld.
Another glorious chapter of Klingon history. Tell me, do they still sing songs of the great Tribble hunt?
You can also see from the screen readout that this is a genetically modified Tribble, so yeah, I think they should let Worf kill it. Riker is also quick to mock the struggle between the Klingons and the Tribble to Worf, who seems to not appreciate the banter. We have seen Riker pick on Worf on multiple occasions, like in the film Star Trek First Contact.
The Defiant. Adrift but salvageable.
Tough little ship.
Little.
You do remember how to fire phasers.
The group alert the security system in the facility and a crow flies by them. Afterwards, Riker and Raffi remark,
"There's something familiar about the crow."
Yeah, right. Like from my nightmares.
They are referencing the events of the Next Generation episode titled Phantasms, in which Data experiences nightmares, some of which included a crow. After hearing two musical notes, which Riker is able to recognize, the group are face to face with the hologram of Professor Moriarty. The arch-enemy of Sherlock Holmes was recreated by Geordi along with Dr. Pulaski on the holodeck in the Next Generation episode Elementary My Dear Data. The first line we hear him say is taken directly from a conversation that he has with Picard and Data in that same episode.
I think, therefore I act.
Is the definition of life cogito ergo sum? I think, therefore I am.
Meanwhile, the Titan arrives at the Fleet Museum at Athon Prime, where many of Starfleet's most storied vessels are kept after they are decommissioned. Captain Shaw tells Ensign LaForge to
find a pocket among the relics.
I believe that this is a reference to the Next Generation episode Relics, where Scotty, a member of the original series crew, is found alive in a transporter by the crew of the Enterprise D. One of the ships at the Fleet Museum is the Constitution-class USS New Jersey, and Picard mentions to Scotty in that episode how he had seen a Constitution-class vessel at the Fleet Museum, possibly referencing the ship.
Constitution class.
Aye. You're familiar with them?
There's one in the Fleet Museum.
Also, the registry on the USS New Jersey is 1975, and Picard's Season 3 showrunner Terry Matalas was born in New Jersey in the year 1975. Then we get the return of Geordi LaForge, played by LeVar Burton. We have seen his on-screen daughter Sydney LaForge all season on the Titan, but his other daughter Alondra makes her debut in this episode and is played by his real-life daughter, Mika Burton. The finale of The Next Generation, All Good Things, featured an alternate future for these characters, and in that future, it was mentioned that LaForge had two daughters named Sydney and Alondra. Two ships are searching for the intruders at Daystrom Station, and one is named the USS Sternbach. This ship is named after longtime Star Trek production designer Rick Sternbach, who has not been involved with the franchise since the film Star Trek Nemesis. On the station, Worf, Raffi, and Riker are still trying to figure out the purpose of Professor Moriarty being there, while the station continues to create different musical notes. Suddenly, Riker is able to recognize the tune and remembers his first encounter with then Lieutenant Commander Data on the holodeck of the Enterprise D, in the pilot episode of The Next Generation titled Encounter at Farpoint. Moriarty's final word in the scene is the first word that Data says to Riker during their first meeting.
Marvelous.
The group are then brought into a room that contains an android golem body made to resemble the final crew member we have yet to see this season, Data, along with the remains of the android B4. Data, while of course being one of the main characters on The Next Generation and playing a small role in the first season of Picard, is one of three quote-unquote Soon-type android brothers that we have seen before, all of which were created by a scientist named Noonien Soon. B4, his first attempt, was the simplest of these Soon-type androids and was found in pieces in the film Star Trek Nemesis. Lore was the result of the next attempt at a fully functional positronic brain, and while it was successful, his personality made him malicious and unstable, which led eventually to him being deactivated in the Next Generation episode titled Descent. Alton Soon, while not an android, would technically be considered their brother too, since he is the biological son of their creator, Noonien Soon. Also, at one point Data tried to create a daughter who he named Lal. While Data was able to bring her to life, she did not survive past a few days, events shown in the Next Generation episode titled The Offspring. In that episode, Data said he was able to store her memories and experiences, and we see that this android at Daystrom Station is able to incorporate all these beings' memories and personalities into itself. On the ship, Seven and Jack look at some of the various other starships docked at the Fleet Museum. The first one they come upon is the USS Defiant, the main vessel used by the crew on the series Deep Space Nine that was introduced during the show's third season premiere. The original USS Defiant was a prototype vessel for the Defiant class and was destroyed in one of the largest battles of the Dominion War. However, another Defiant-class ship, the Sao Paulo, was renamed the Defiant due to its accomplishments in the war. The next ship they stop on is the Constitution-class USS New Jersey that I mentioned earlier. The next is the USS Enterprise A, which Jack correctly refers to as Kirk's Enterprise. While it could be said that Captain James T. Kirk had many more adventures on the original ship, he was not the first captain of it, something fans now get to see on the series Strange New Worlds, which features a younger version of the Enterprise under the command of Captain Pike. Besides Captains Kirk and Pike, now Admiral Robert April was the actual first captain of the USS Enterprise. The next one they stop on is close to Seven's heart, and that is the USS Voyager. She mentions that even though the ship is not as well known as the Enterprise, that it went further out than any other ship had gone before, which is true, since even though the USS Defiant traveled to the Gamma Quadrant on the series DS9, the Delta Quadrant, where Voyager took place, is further away from Federation space. While they are talking, Jack tells Seven that he thinks everyone is looking for connections, which is something that his dad told him just 2 episodes ago.
We all long for connection.
I think we all need connection.
Then they come upon the HMS Bounty, which I described earlier. The two also briefly recap the events of the finale of the film Star Trek The Voyage Home. Geordi refuses to help Picard and company, but the kids have other ideas. Picard and LaForge's children are able to steal the cloaking device from the Klingon bird of prey and install it on the USS Titan. The USS Defiant also had a cloaking device, but it is stated that they are using the one on the Bounty. Federation ships usually do not use cloaking devices thanks to a long-standing treaty with the Romulan Empire, who, like the Klingons, had developed and used the technology. Sydney and Jack are able to correctly install the device, and Geordi finally agrees to help. Before he does so, he tells Jack to stay away from his daughter, and in case you are wondering, this was the subtext of that exchange.
I don't want to see you sniffing around her anymore this afternoon. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Boy, have you lost your mind, because I'll help you find it.
The remaining crew activate Daystrom android M510, and multiple personalities emerge. Although still not fully functional, he is able to reveal that the body of Jean-Luc Picard is what was stolen by the Changelings. The episode ends with a now captured Riker coming face to face with his wife, Deanna Troi, meaning that each member of the original TNG cast, set to appear this season, does so in this episode. Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss?, where today I'll be breaking down the 7th episode of the final season of Star Trek Picard, titled Dominion. Though not as heavy on the Easter eggs as the prior episode, this chapter gives us some more background on Vadic and why the Changelings are attacking Starfleet. It also included the return of another actor from Star Trek history that you have seen more times than you probably realize. The title of this episode, Dominion, is a reference to the Dominion War that occurred between the Federation and various other allies against a sovereign force from the Gamma Quadrant, and how the effects of this war are still being felt on both sides. These events were told throughout the run of the series Deep Space Nine, especially from about the 3rd season on. The Changelings, or Founders as they were called as leaders of the Dominion, conquered or otherwise controlled many species in the Gamma Quadrant, then brought them together into one military force and attempted to conquer the Alpha and Beta Quadrants as well. The Changelings created the Dominion after hundreds of years of persecution from humanoid beings, or solids as they referred to them as. But the word Dominion is another word for control, and we learned in this episode that not only is the being that is controlling Vadic possibly not a changeling, but that Jack has the ability to establish dominion over other people's actions. The episode begins with someone whistling the nursery rhyme, 3 Blind Mice. Which we learn later in the episode is being done by Vadic. The song was written in the 17th century and was thought to be about Queen Mary I killing 3 Protestant priests due to their religious beliefs, which is why they are referred to as blind. However, when the story was published, it ends with the mice using a tonic to grow new tails and recover their eyesight, and then living happily ever after. Vadic is probably fond of this fable because it is similar to how she and the other changelings were captured and tortured by Starfleet, but then escaped and grew new faces, so to speak. The USS Titan is hiding in an area of space named the Chintaka Scrapyard among debris. This is probably where one, if not both battles in the Chintaka system took place during the Dominion War, which are 2 of the largest in the entire campaign. These events took place mostly in the Deep Space Nine episodes Tears of the Prophets and The Changing Face of Evil. Seven is on the Titan, talking to someone that she thinks is her old friend Tuvok, who is once again played by Tim Russ. Before starring as the Vulcan security officer on Voyager for 7 seasons, Tim Russ had appeared as other characters on Star Trek. His first role in Trek was as a mercenary in the Next Generation episode Starship Mine, where he did not play a Vulcan, but was subdued by a Vulcan neck pinch from none other than Jean-Luc Picard. In that same year, Mr. Russ would also play a Klingon mercenary on the Deep Space Nine episode Invasive Procedures, and then a year later would be a background actor in the film Star Trek Generations. But still, and much to the dismay of Mr. Russ, he's probably best known for his role in another sci-fi project, the film Spaceballs.
We ain't found
Tuvok took a special interest in Seven and befriended her after she came on Voyager. Seven mentions them playing the Vulcan strategy game Calto, which is something seen in the Voyager episode, The Omega Directive. Seven is also able to discern that this is not Tuvok and says this.
A Vulcan would never go to Acleon 7 after the anti-Kolinar demonstrations.
Kolinar is a Vulcan ritual wherein a Vulcan will attempt to purge all emotion, and Tuvok at one point left Starfleet for a time to immerse himself in it. In the original Star Trek motion picture, Spock was seen taking part in this ritual at the beginning of the film. After the intro, Picard, Dr. Crusher, and LaForge discuss how to fight the changelings, and the Doctor admits that she is thinking of creating a biological weapon, similar to the morphogenic virus that Section 31 created during the Dominion War that threatened the entire changeling population. Eventually, a cure for the virus was created by Dr. Bashir on DS9, and after it was given to Odo, he then was able to pass it on to the female changeling and the changelings in the Great Link. Events that occurred throughout much of the later seasons of the series Deep Space Nine, and that Vadic also references later in the episode. I know that this is an extreme summation of these events, but if you would like to know more, I suggest you check out my video on the changelings and their history that I released earlier this year. This isn't the first time that the morphogenic virus has been brought up on the season of Picard, and has done so here to foreshadow the eventual reveal later in the episode that Section 31 is also responsible for the evolution of the changelings introduced this season. Picard and LaForge want to understand why Picard's body was taken from Daystrom Station and think that Data may be able to help them. After the new Golem body, known as Daystrom Android M510, is activated by Lieutenant LaForge, Data's personality is the first to emerge. He asks about a ship named the Scimitar, which is the ship that Shinzon was in command of in the film Star Trek Nemesis. In the climax of that film, Data was forced to sacrifice his life to destroy the ship and save the crew of the Enterprise E. Data's personality quickly switches to his brother Lore, a character first introduced on the Next Generation episode titled Data Lore, which by the way would be a way better name for this new character than Daystrom Android M510. Instead of deactivating Data's evil sibling like we thought in the TNG episode The Descent, it looks like Section 31 decided to keep Lore archived like we would an old Super Mario Kart game file.
Good call.
It becomes very difficult for Picard to witness what he sees as his friend in pain, and tells Geordi about how Data asked him to let him go. Even though Data's body was destroyed in the film Nemesis, before this happened, Data uploaded his memories and consciousness to his other brother Daryl, B4, basically making a copy of himself before he was destroyed. In the first season finale of Picard, Jean-Luc encountered Data's consciousness while he was being uploaded into his new Golem body, and Data asked him to be terminated, which Data believed would give his life more meaning. This version of Data's consciousness that we are seeing in this episode of Picard is aware of his sacrifice on the Scimitar, so this is not the same version of Data that Picard communicated with in the first season. Next we see Vadic reporting to whomever is controlling her, and she states that her prisoners are loyal and not giving her any information. These prisoners are of course Will Riker and Deanna Troi, who were seen captured at the end of the last episode. This entity, which is listed in the captions as the Face, is able to hurt Vadic and seems to imply that they are not a changeling themselves. As I mentioned, the Dominion were a conglomerate of alien species controlled by the changelings, but this season, it looks like it is the changelings that are being controlled by another alien race or being. Back on the Titan, Jack and Sydney continue to flirt, and eventually Jack is able to read her thoughts. It is quite obvious by this point that Jack is not what he seems, and reading minds seems to be a new talent he picked up. Mind reading is not actually as uncommon as you would think in the Star Trek universe, and Vulcans and Betazoids are two of the larger and more well-known alien races that have this ability. After a game of cat and mouse, Vadic and members of her crew are cornered on the Titan. Vadic reveals to Picard and Dr. Crusher that Starfleet, and more specifically Section 31, are responsible for her evolution. During the Dominion War, she and 9 other changelings were captured and experimented on during something she calls Project Proteus. Proteus is also the name of a deity from Greek mythology that is known for being able to change his shape, like the changing nature of the sea. Vadic seems to reference this directly later in the episode when she addresses the crew.
To be mutable, fluid, means knowing what the river knows.
It is also revealed that Vadic took the face of the doctor that experimented on her after she killed her. This is eerily similar to the origin story of Odo, the changeling head of security on Deep Space Nine. He also was experimented on when he was found by the Bajoran people and chose to emulate the appearance of his captor. Since Odo was relatively young, he was not able to mimic his appearance to be exactly alike, as Vadic seems to be able to. However, Odo did not kill the doctor that experimented on him and was eventually able to forgive him in the Deep Space Nine episode The Begotten. Picard and Dr. Crusher are able to find a way to track the changelings because of the compound Thelominium 847. While this has never been mentioned in Star Trek before, the number 47 appears more than any other number in the history of the franchise.
Authorization Picard 47 Alpha Tango.
Level 3C, Section 547.
Failure anticipated in 47 seconds.
Other than a few bumps and bruises, I'd say you feel fine for a man of 147.
And its frequent usage can be traced back to Joe Menosky, a writer that worked on The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and even Discovery. Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss? Where today I'll be breaking down the 8th episode of the final season of Star Trek Picard, titled Surrender.
Never give up, never surrender.
The episode begins right where the last one ended, with Vadic in control of the USS Titan. The first shot is of Vadic through the evacuation hatch on the bridge, foreshadowing her eventual fate at the end of this episode. While this probably was her last performance as the character, Amanda Plummer has been a delight this season as the villain Vadic, creating a frightening yet sometimes sympathetic character. The actress is perhaps most well known for her role in the film Pulp Fiction, where she and a partner took hostages in a restaurant, similar to how she has taken the crew of the Titan hostage in this episode. While Vadic's crew is going through the ship, Jack tries to see what is going on and projects his consciousness into another crewman who is eventually killed. I know there are a lot of theories out there about Jack, and after this episode, I think one may stand out above the others, which I will discuss in a bit. On Vadic's ship, the Shrike, Will Riker and Deanna Troi tend to each other's wounds, both physically and emotionally. At one point, Deanna reveals that a changeling came to their house as her husband and that he was bad at pizza. This references these characters' appearance in the first season Picard episode Nepenthe, in which Riker was making a pizza when Jean-Luc came to see them. On the Titan, Jack reveals to his mother and his father that he's able to see through other people's eyes and inhabit their bodies. Picard comes up with this idea.
In the event of a hostile takeover, high-ranking Starfleet officers are given an override codex.
This code is the same kind of code that Captain Kirk and the Enterprise used to take control of the USS Reliant in the film Wrath of Khan.
Each ship has its own combination code
to prevent an enemy from doing what we're attempting.
On the Shrike, Riker and Troi are saved by Worf, who then has an awkward moment with them both. While it did always seem that Riker and Troi would end up together during the run of The Next Generation, there was a brief moment when Worf and Troi entered into a romantic relationship together. This was after Worf saw himself married to Troi in an alternate reality in the TNG episode Parallels. On the Titan, Picard meets up with LaForge and they decide to let Data fight Lore for control of the new android body. We see both Data and Lore in a brightly lit area, which looks very similar to the one created in the Star Trek Lower Decks episode Reflections, in which the character Rutherford is forced to battle for control of his own personality with a younger version of himself. Star Trek Lower Decks is honestly one of my favorite new shows and takes a lot of references from the Next Generation era, so it's cool that in this case, it seems like Picard is taking a cue from them. When we first enter this realm, you can hear a violin, and Data was shown playing the violin on the Enterprise on many occasions and even kept one in his quarters. This is one of the many characteristics of the character Sherlock Holmes that Data adapted into his own life, and we see a few other props from his love for Holmes in this scene, such as his hat and pipe. You can even briefly hear a part of a conversation between Geordi and Data.
Everything in here has some significance.
Holmes collected nothing, neither trinkets nor thoughts which were not specifically significant to him.
This took place in the TNG episode Elementary, My Dear Data, an episode in which Data and LaForge took on the parts of Holmes and Watson in the holodeck. Riker, Troi, Worf, and Raffi find Jean-Luc's body and learn that the changelings have removed part of his brain. When Raffi and Troi meet, Troi says,
"Strange day, son. You're telling me."
This could be a reference to the hit song by the band The Doors and the fact that it would seem that a red door now holds the key to the mystery surrounding Jack, and that Deanna may be the one that is able to unlock it. While Data and Lore struggle for control, more objects from Data's past appear, including a tricorder. This could be a reference to Mr. Tricorder, Data's one-man show from the film Star Trek Generations.
Mr. Tricorder.
Data then retrieves a crystal that contains the hologram of Tasha Yar. Tasha Yar was the head of security at the beginning of The Next Generation, but was killed in the episode Skin of Evil. Before her death, she recorded a message to Data and contained it within this crystal. Geordi and Wesley Crusher found this crystal in his quarters after they thought Data had been killed in the TNG episode The Most Toys. During their time as friends on the Enterprise, Data and Tasha got very close, especially in the episode The Naked Now, an episode that also revealed the feelings that Jean-Luc Picard and Dr. Crusher had for each other. On the Titan, Jack appears to be ready to give himself up, but instead pulls a Luke Skywalker and pretends to hold a thermal detonator in his hands. At one point, he says something that sounds very familiar.
There's really no point resisting.
This is an amalgamation of the infamous phrase said by the Borg.
Resistance is futile.
After this, Seven remains on the bridge while the rest of the crew are locked away. Vadic then says something very curious to 7 of 9.
How fitting it is for you to stay and witness this.
Given that Seven used to be a member of the Borg, I'm really starting to believe that Jack may in fact have some connection to the Borg. In the episode The Best of Both Worlds, which has been referenced by characters this season, Dr. Crusher stated that Picard's DNA was being rewritten as part of the assimilation process. This could mean that when Picard severed his link to the Borg and had his mechanical augmentations removed, that something from the assimilation could still affect his physiology, and he could then pass this on to his offspring. Picard's neurological issues were not diagnosed until the last season of The Next Generation, which of course was years after his assimilation. I will go more in depth on my theory about Jack during my Monday morning podcast, WDIM News, so make sure that you are subscribed so you know when that comes out. But let me know in the comments now if you agree with this theory, if you think he is a power wraith, or if you have another theory. As Data and Lore continue to fight for control, Data pulls out a deck of cards. This is the same deck that we saw him and his crewmates play poker with on various occasions, such as in the last scene of the series finale, All Good Things. The last thing that we see from Data's past is Spot, his pet cat. Spot made his first appearance in the TNG episode Data's Day and would go on to be seen or mentioned in 7 other episodes on The Next Generation along with 2 films. A deleted scene from the film Nemesis revealed that after Data died, that Worf was the one who took care of Spot. Data tells Lore,
"This simple creature managed something quite miraculous. In a way, he taught me to love."
This could be referencing a scene from the film Generations, in which Data found Spot in the rubble of the Enterprise D after it was destroyed and experienced one of his first true emotions. Data tricks Lore and is able to use his memories to integrate both personalities into one. He then takes over the Titan systems and opens the evacuation hatch into space. Jack creates a force field around himself and Seven when she delivers this line.
"Get off my bridge."
This was something Picard was known to say on multiple occasions, some of which have aged better than others. Vadic is frozen in space and then shatters apart when she hits the strike. I'm not sure if this kills a changeling, or if perhaps the explosion of the strike could have reheated her back together, similar to the T-1000 in the film Terminator 2 Judgment Day. When Seven gives the order to fire on the strike, she says,
"Give it everything we've got."
This could be a fun reference to everyone's favorite miracle worker, James Montgomery Scott. Then we finally get all the members of the original Enterprise D crew appearing this season in one room as they all meet together for the first time since the film Nemesis. This was without a doubt one of the best moments of the season and perhaps the entire Picard series. Deanna meets with Jack while the Titan engages the cloaking device. In case you missed it, the Titan installed a Klingon cloaking device a couple weeks ago in the episode The Bounty. Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss?, where today I'll be breaking down the penultimate episode of Star Trek Picard titled Vox. This entry covered a lot and had a ton of Easter eggs, some more obvious than others, including not one but 2 versions of the Enterprise and a whole lot more. Besides covering all the Easter eggs and references, I will explain the Borg plot and try to answer some of the questions you may still have about Jack. If you still have any questions after watching this video, let me know in the comments, because I'm planning on doing a follow-up video to this one later in the week, where I will pull specific questions from the audience and answer them. The episode title Vox is derived from Latin and is now the 16th episode of Star Trek taken from a Latin phrase, the first being the infamous Next Generation Dr. Crusher softcore porn episode Sub Rosa.
Take my breath away.
Oh, that's not right. No.
This episode begins with Deanna helping Jack to understand what is behind the red door in his visions. He recalls a memory with his mother on a planet named Raritan 4, which is a reference to the town that Picard showrunner Terry Matalas grew up in Raritan, New Jersey. Eventually, Jack does open the door and sees a large Borg cube behind it. A connection to the Borg with Jack has been strongly hinted at all season, especially in the episode before this one, like when Jack put his own twist on the infamous Borg phrase, "resistance is futile."
There's really no point resisting.
Deanna is forced to reveal what she has seen to both Dr. Crusher and Picard, and after the intro, we can hear the voice of Locutus himself.
I am Locutus of Borg. Resistance is futile. Your life, as it has been, is over.
This is taken from the Next Generation episode, The Best of Both Worlds, which thanks to this season of Picard, has become without a doubt the most important episode in the history of TNG, given that the events of that episode led to the birth of Jack Crusher, a human-Borg hybrid. It would seem that he himself has now become the best of both worlds.
No way!
Let's also not forget that all this is thanks to the meddling of Q, another important figure from Picard's past, who was introduced in the pilot episode of The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint. In a later appearance on the series, the Enterprise D was flung into the Delta Quadrant by Q to face the Borg for the first time, in the entry titled Q Who. Although there is an episode of Star Trek Enterprise that would seem to contradict this being the first contact between humans and the Borg, but those events are tied to a paradox, which the episode Q Who would seem to predate.
Oh, it's the chicken and the egg.
Dr. Crusher theorizes that when Jean-Luc was assimilated by the Borg during the events of The Best of Both Worlds, that everything was not removed from his body as they had thought, and that some kind of unknown organic technology was left over. When Picard died, Dr. Eric Soon saw some proof of this in his brain, which is why Picard's body was kept at Daystrom Station. Jean-Luc is then compelled to tell Jack what they have found and how he's responsible. He then tells Jack that the Borg put something in him, and he refers to it as
a seed.
This could be a reference to the original series episode Space Seed, which was the first appearance of the greatest villain of that series, Khan Noonien Singh. Picard wants Jack to go to a Vulcan facility on a planet he calls Keslavar. While this planet has not been mentioned before, if you split the name in half, it spells out Kes-Lover. Perhaps a writer on this series wants everyone to know how they feel about the character Kes, who was played by Jennifer Lean on the first 3 seasons of Star Trek Picard. The character was replaced on the show for all intents and purposes by 7 of 9, who is still yelling at people on the bridge all these years later on Picard.
Get off my bridge.
Jack, however, doesn't agree and uses his Professor X powers to control the security detail assigned to him and escapes the Titan. As Picard and Dr. Crusher watch Jack leave, the Doctor references her son Wesley and how she gave him space. Wesley is of course played by Will Wheaton and was introduced in the first episode of The Next Generation. He even made an appearance last season on Picard, and I would not be surprised if we see him help out his mother and half-brother this season as well in the final episode of the series. Jack travels to an unknown area of space, and the shuttle states that a transwarp conduit is forming. A transwarp conduit is a connected network of artificially created energy portals that are linked through subspace. This network allows the Borg to travel great distances in a shorter amount of time than a ship traveling at warp speed. This concept was first discovered by Geordi LaForge in the Next Generation episode titled Descent. Back on the Titan, the crew discovered that when Picard was assimilated, that the Borg altered his DNA with a new genetic code. When Jack was born, he inherited this code, which made him a receiver for the Borg signal that connects them as a hive mind. This also reveals why Vadic stole Picard's body from Daystrom Station, so that they could extract that part of his brain that had this abnormality and use it further. We then see the beginnings of Frontier Day, which is being led by the Enterprise F under the command of Admiral Shelby. This is the live debut of the Enterprise F, but this ship actually made its debut over a decade ago in the game Star Trek Online. A contest to create the ship was held, and the ship's design was based on that of the winner, Adam Eiley. The creators of Star Trek Picard chose to keep the design of the Odyssey-class ship due to its popularity with the fan base. Admiral Elizabeth Shelby was first introduced in, yep, you guessed it, the TNG episode The Best of Both Worlds, where she played a brash commander who already had her sights set on a spot on the Enterprise bridge. She is played once again by Elizabeth Dennehy, who, like Season 3 villain Amanda Plummer, also has a famous actor for a father, as she is the daughter of acclaimed actor Brian Dennehy, who sadly passed away in 2020. It is also nice to see that Shelby eventually rose to the highest rank in Starfleet, Fleet Admiral. Admiral Shelby reveals that Frontier Day is the anniversary of the maiden voyage of the NX-01 Enterprise, the ship captained by Jonathan Archer on the series Star Trek Enterprise. It is ironic that events shown on that series will play a part in the finale for the Next Generation crew on Picard, since Riker and Troy also played a part in the series finale of Star Trek Enterprise. She also reveals what she calls the newest advancement in technology, something called fleet formation. The first ship online is
USS Pulaski, synchronization online.
This is probably a reference to Dr. Catherine Pulaski, who appeared on the second season of The Next Generation as a replacement for Dr. Crusher. She was played by actress Diana Muldaur, who also played two other characters on the original series. Although Dr. Pulaski was on the Enterprise D during the events of their first encounter with the Borg, the aforementioned episode Q Who is one of only 2 episodes during the second season that she does not appear. Jack enters the Borg cube still looking for answers. Very quickly, he hears the voice of the Borg Queen, which is unmistakably the voice of actress Alice Krige, the original actress to take on the role in the film First Contact. She also returned to play her in the series finale of Voyager and also voiced the character in the Lower Decks episode I, Erectus. She is the first of 3 different actresses to play the Borg Queen, preceding Susanna Thompson on Voyager and Annie Wersching on the last season of Picard. On the Titan, Data and LaForge discover that part of Picard's genetic gift from the Borg has been written into the computer code used by the transporters. This reveals that the reason that the changelings wanted to take Picard's body is to replicate the code, then implement it into everyone that used a transporter, effectively assimilating anyone under the age of 25 that used a transporter since Picard's body was stolen. The Borg Queen then assimilates Jack and uses his ability to control everyone with this genetic code to take over almost every officer, along with the new fleet formation protocol taking over every ship's systems. The Queen executes Order 66 and sends the fleet into chaos. One ship signals that they are briefly able to gain control of their ship, the USS Excelsior. The prototype Excelsior-class ship was eventually captained by Hikaru Sulu, who looks to have gotten a ship named after him as well from the ones listed on the screen. On the bottom of the screen, you can see a ship named the USS Okuda. This is named after Michael and Denise Okuda, longtime artists for Star Trek. On top of the screen, there is a ship named the USS Cochrane, which is almost definitely named after Zefram Cochrane, the inventor of the warp-capable drive, who first appeared on the original series but is most commonly associated with the performance of James Cromwell in First Contact. The crew is able to escape the Titan, but not before losing Captain Shaw in the process. This means that since 7 of 9 is the first officer of the Titan, that she is now in command of the ship once they get it back from the Borg, of course. They arrive at the Fleet Museum, where LaForge reveals to them a restored version of the Enterprise D. This ship was thought to have been destroyed in the film Generations, but according to Geordi, Starfleet was required to remove it. This may also be the reason why Captain Kirk's body was removed from the planet and stored in Daystrom Station. Data explains that he is having an emotional reaction to seeing the ship, which is thanks to him being able to access Lor's emotions after their integration in the last episode. This scene also echoes one with Picard and Data when Picard first sees the Phoenix in the film First Contact. LaForge says that he restored the ship as a surprise and that they can't use the Enterprise E, the last ship this crew was seen on before this season of Picard in the movie Nemesis. The crew all look at Worf, and he states that whatever happened was not his fault. This directly references the fact that Worf took over as captain of the ship after Picard was promoted to admiral. The first season finale of Prodigy, which also had to do with a computer virus taking over Starfleet, showed a battle-damaged Enterprise E at one point, after it was nearly destroyed by other Starfleet ships attacking it, which could be the event that is being referenced in this scene. They enter the old bridge and look around, and Picard remembers the carpet more than anything else. When Picard takes command over the ship, you can hear the computer say,
"Authorization acknowledged. USS Enterprise now under command of Captain Jean-Luc Picard."
This is the voice of Majel Barrett Roddenberry, who besides playing the roles of Number 1 in the pilot episode of Star Trek titled The Cage, and later playing the role of Nurse Chapel on the same series, was also the voice of virtually every Starfleet vessel on The Next Generation, as well as Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and the films created during this time. Also during this time, she would play the mother of Deanna Troi, Luxana, and appear on The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. Each character takes their station, as Picard says his famous catchphrase to end the episode.
Engage!
Hey everyone, and welcome to What Did I Miss?, where today I'll be breaking down the epic finale of the series Star Trek Picard, titled The Last Generation. The episode begins with a warning from Federation President Anton Chekhov, warning ships to stay away from Earth because of the Borg attack. This character is the son of Pavel Chekhov, who was played by Walter Koenig on the original series as well as in 7 films. Mr. Koenig also returned to voice this character, who is not only named after a famous writer, but his first name is a homage to Anton Yelchin, the actor who played Chekhov in the J.J. Abrams films, who died tragically in 2016. This warning is also reminiscent of the warning made by the Federation president in the film The Voyage Home after Earth was thought to have been under attack by an alien probe that was crippling the planet. During the warning, President Chekhov states,
"There are always possibilities."
This is a quote that is attributed to Spock and was often quoted by his close friends.
There are always possibilities, Spock said.
The crew determine that the Borg signal is coming from Jupiter, and Picard gets another chance to say his infamous catchphrase,
"Engage."
When they arrive, they find that the Borg are hiding inside the gases of Jupiter, specifically in what is known as the Eye of Jupiter, which is actually a persistent high-pressure storm that looks like a red spot or eye, much like the red eyes that assimilated Borg are known to have, including Jack. The crew decide that they have to stop the signal that is emitting from the Borg cube at all costs, and Picard says,
"What began over 35 years ago ends tonight."
He is probably referring to the first meeting that the crew had with the Borg, which occurred in the Next Generation episode Q Who, in which Q threw the Enterprise D thousands of light years into uncharted space to meet the Borg for the very first time. This is why it is kind of fitting that Q appears in the end credit scene of this episode, since he is responsible for the conflict between the Borg and the Federation. The Borg cube that is hiding in the planet's gases is heavily damaged and looks to have been altered. I wonder if this Borg cube is the same one that was thought to have been destroyed after the battle for Earth in the first act of the film Star Trek First Contact. The fact that the Borg Queen in this episode is voiced by Alice Krige, who also played the character in that film, would seem to lend some credence to that theory. On the Titan, Seven and Raffi are trying to save whoever they can, and one of the people with Seven reveals that they are just a cook. With the invention of food replicators, which were first shown on Starfleet ships during the Next Generation, having a cook on a starship doesn't make a lot of sense, unless this is a reference to the film Under Siege, in which a US battleship was taken by traitors and they were defeated by a lowly cook played by none other than Steven Seagal.
Are you like some special forces guy or something?
I'm just a cook.
On the Enterprise D, the crew decide to find the source of the signal and destroy it, while also trying to save Jack in the process, when the computer says,
"Electropathic pattern located."
This is the unmistakable voice of Majel Barrett Roddenberry, who was the voice of every Starfleet vessel up until the USS Discovery. Sadly, she passed away in 2008, and the line said by the computer in this episode of Picard is taken from the Next Generation episode titled Violations. Before being the voice of the computer, Miss Barrett Roddenberry first played the character number 1 on the pilot episode of Star Trek titled The Cage. Although her character was not given a name at the time, Picard referring to Riker as number 1 on the Next Generation is actually an homage to her character. Miss Barrett Roddenberry also played the character Nurse Chapel on the original series, and Deanna's mother Luxana Troi on the Next Generation as well as Deep Space Nine. The crew splits up and LaForge is given command of the Enterprise. I think that this is the first time we have seen Geordi in the big chair on the Enterprise D since the first season Next Generation episode, The Arsenal of Freedom, in which LaForge was captain of the Enterprise D while Picard and other members of the crew were captured on a planet below. Picard, Riker, and Worf beam onto the scariest Borg cube ever, looking for Jack. One interesting detail of design on the Borg ship is that I noticed that on the ceiling, you can see these things that look like 5 lights. Okay, 4 lights surrounding another fixture, but these are actually Borg distribution nodes, and in the TNG episode The Best of Both Worlds, the away team destroyed a bunch of these in order to slow down the Borg ship. RIP Fleet Admiral Shelby. Picard finds Jack, who at this point has almost been completely assimilated by the Borg. Behind Jack is what remains of the Borg Queen, who is played by a stunt double but voiced by Alice Krige. It is unclear how many Borg Queens there are in canon, but in reality, 3 different actresses have played the Borg Queen, including Miss Krige, who played the part first in the film First Contact and then again in the finale of the series Voyager. Also on Voyager, frequent Star Trek contributor Suzanne Thompson played the Queen in 3 episodes, and Annie Wershing played her last season on Picard. I know that there are a lot of questions as to how the Borg from last season figure into this season, and for those answers, I suggest you check out my podcast, WDIM News. As on this week's show, I went into a lot of these questions from the comments in my videos about this season. On the Titan, Seven and her crew devise a way to give Picard and company more time. Seven really seems to be taking to a leadership role quickly, and even uses the same catchphrase as Picard.
Engage.
The Borg Queen tells Picard that the Borg were left poisoned, which is probably not referencing her last encounter with Picard. Instead, she is referring to the finale of the series Star Trek Voyager, titled Endgame, in which a version of Catherine Janeway from an alternate future, alongside the crew of the USS Voyager, defeated the Borg by infecting them with a neurolytic pathogen, which is eerily similar to the morphogenic virus that Starfleet used to defeat the Changelings on Deep Space Nine during the Dominion War, and eventually led them to working with the Borg to attack Starfleet this season. While this series is definitely a love letter to the Next Generation, it is nice that the writers on Picard were able to include aspects of Deep Space Nine and Voyager into the storyline. The Borg then become aware of Worf and Riker and attack them, which gives us a chance to see Worf beat down some zombie Borg. His first move is to go for the arm of the drone attacking him, a move he used before while fighting the Borg on the outside of the Enterprise E during the film First Contact.
Assimilate this.
Data convinces the crew that he can navigate through the Borg cube and find the source of the signal. Before he does so, he says,
"Here goes nothing."
Which is almost definitely a direct reference to when this line was said by Lando Calrissian in the film Return of the Jedi.
Here goes nothing.
Honestly, this whole sequence with the Enterprise D inside the Borg cube has a very Return of the Jedi feel, so kudos to the creators of Star Trek Picard for owning up to it. The crew are then faced with a classic Star Trek situation in which they are forced to sacrifice the lives of others for the greater good.
Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Or the one.
Riker then delivers what is one of the best lines ever on Star Trek after deciding to stay behind and look for Picard and Jack.
I owe him a lifetime. The least I can spare is a minute.
My emotions! My emotions!
Picard also decides to sacrifice himself by plugging back into the Borg Collective. When he begins his assimilation, the scene is cut with many scenes taken from the film First Contact. While sharing the Borg consciousness with Jack, Picard mentions how he is waiting in a vineyard to die alone. This is referencing where we first found Picard when the series began, sitting at his vineyard and making wine. The Enterprise fires on the Borg signal generator, and Riker and Worf seem to concede their fate when Worf says the now infamous Klingon saying,
"It is a fine day indeed to die with honor,"
which Michael Dorn as Worf has said many times over the years, but first in the Next Generation episode, Sins of the Father.
It is a good day to die, Duras. And the day is not yet over.
Oh no, he didn't.
Picard is able to save Jack when Troy finally has something to do and helps them find everyone on the Borg cube, who are then beamed to safety. This also has the effect of removing the control that the Borg had over the fleet, and the ships stand down. The crew then reunite on the bridge of the Enterprise, which allows Worf to become that uncle of yours that randomly falls asleep at family gatherings. Riker lets us know through a voiceover that Starfleet has implemented a way to not only remove the Borg DNA code using the transporters, but also detect changelings, which was created by Dr. Crusher, who is now the head of Starfleet Medical and has been promoted to the rank of Admiral.
Admiral.
We then see the return of the real Tuvok, played by Tim Russ. This is the second episode this season that Tim Russ has returned to play Tuvok, although in the 7th episode this season titled Dominion, he was actually playing a changeling version of himself. He presents her with a log from Captain Shaw in the form of a hologram, which looks very similar to the hologram created by Tasha Yar before her death in the first season of The Next Generation. Tuvok mentions that the log sent by Captain Shaw was done before the ship set course for the Righton system. This was when the Titan initially engaged Vadic and the Shrike, which means that this review was sent before the events of Episode 2. Worf and Raffi also share a very touching moment when he initiates a hug with her, which is much different than how he acted earlier in the season when meeting his old crewmates. We then fast forward a year and see the Enterprise D where it should be, among some of the most famous ships in the Federation's history, at the Fleet Museum. The ship looks to be between the USS Enterprise A and the USS Stargazer, the first ship that Jean-Luc Picard was the captain of. As they shut down the Enterprise D, Geordi says,
Take care of her, Geordi.
Yes, sir. After all, she's always taking good care of us.
This is very similar to a line said by Dr. McCoy to Data in the series premiere of The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint.
You treat her like a lady, and she'll always bring you home.
Jack has also joined Starfleet and is now an ensign being taken to his first assignment. The voice that greets them,
Admiral Picard, Admiral Crusher, welcome to Space Dock.
Is the same that did earlier this season when they approached the Titan,
Admiral Picard, Captain Riker, welcome to the Titan.
And is the voice of Terry Matalas, who is not only the showrunner of this season of Picard, but also wrote and directed the finale. It is then revealed that the USS Titan A is now the USS Enterprise G, having been renamed after the events of this season. This is not the first time that we have seen a ship renamed like this, as the USS Sao Paulo was renamed the USS Defiant after the first Defiant was destroyed towards the very end of the series Deep Space Nine. Before taking out the new Enterprise, Captain Seven must say something, which Jack calls
writing the opening line to your legacy.
This is referencing the possible series Star Trek Legacy, which showrunner Terry Matalas has pitched as a continuation for members of this cast. In fact, there is a petition online that you can sign, and if you want to know more about this idea, you should check out this video I did when he announced it. We then find the old crew back at 10 Forward Avenue, in this case the actual bar, and not the one we have seen recreated this season. You can tell this because LaForge refers to Guinan being there with them, the character played by Whoopi Goldberg on The Next Generation, and who also returned last season on Picard. Worf says that he has to leave because
I have a lecture on the Mugatu meditation in the morning.
The Mugatu are large beasts that look like an ape crossed with a rhinoceros and were first shown in the original series episode, A Private Little War. Data then starts to tell a joke and is cut off. This is the same joke that he was trying to tell in the Next Generation episode, The Naked Now.
There was a young lady from Venus whose body was shaped like a...
Captain to security, come in!
Picard can't help but quote Shakespeare one last time as he quotes Julius Caesar to his crewmates at 10 Forward. Shakespeare is often quoted on Star Trek, and by Picard specifically, possibly due to Sir Patrick Stewart being a famous stage actor as well, as he has starred in at least 18 major stage productions based on the works of Shakespeare alone. Before they leave, Picard pulls out a deck of cards, and the group continue to play cards as the shot drifts away from them overhead, which is very similar to the last scene of The Next Generation in the episode titled All Good Things. The finale also provides a mid-credit scene in which Q appears to Jack and tells him that his trial has just begun. This is referencing his father Jean-Luc's first and last encounters with Q, in which Picard was told that he was on trial for the rights of humanity. If you are wondering how Q is here after he appeared to die last season, Jack asks Q the same question, which Q says,
"And here I was hoping the Next Generation wouldn't think so linearly."
What this means is that this version of Q is younger than the one we saw last season, so this Q may not even be aware of what happened with Picard and did not grow as a character at all. In my opinion, this was added to perhaps lead into the first adventure for the crew on Star Trek Legacy if that series is ever made. Well, that was everything I saw, but let me know what I missed in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please don't forget to hit that like button, and I will see you next time on What Did I Miss?